Good evening, everyone. I'm State Senator Jason Lewis. Thank you so much for joining us for our latest community conversation. Our topic tonight is early education and childcare, which covers care for young children from birth through age 5 and also out of school time care for children up to age 12. I want to start by thanking our event co-sponsors. They include the Common Start Coalition and also my colleagues in the legislature, State Representatives Mike Day, Paul Donato, Rich Haggerty, Steve Altrino, and Kate Lippa-Garabedian. I also want to thank Tom Dalton and Emily Graniff in my office for all of their hard work organizing tonight's event. Back in the 1800s, Massachusetts pioneered the idea that K through 12 education should be a public good, available and accessible to all children and families. Of course, we now take this for granted, but at that time, this was indeed a revolutionary idea. Today, there is a growing consensus that we should be thinking about early education and childcare in the same way, that high quality, affordable care should be available and accessible to all children and all families. Achieving this goal would ensure that every child gets the strong start in life that they deserve, and that extensive research has shown us yields long-term benefits for both the child and for society at large. Working families would receive the assistance that they desperately need, since childcare is often one of their biggest household expenses, and the costs here in Massachusetts are among the highest in the country. We would also enjoy a stable early education system that can provide high-quality care with educators who are treated with respect and compensated accordingly. And finally, we would provide significant benefits to workers, employers, and our economy at large by enabling a more productive workforce, particularly for women. The COVID-19 pandemic has certainly highlighted just how critical early education and childcare is for Massachusetts children, families, and businesses. As we recover from the pandemic, we have, I believe, an incredible opportunity to work together at the local, state, and federal level to achieve the goal of truly universal access to high quality, affordable care for all. So tonight we have a fantastic panel to help us better understand this issue and the way forward for Massachusetts and our nation. We are very fortunate to have as our first speaker, Congresswoman Katherine Clark, a national leader on this topic of early education and care. Congresswoman Clark represents Massachusetts' 5th congressional district, which includes 24 cities and towns stretching from Winthrop to Framingham. Last year, she was elected by her colleagues to serve as the Assistant Speaker in Congress. She's also a member of the House Committee on Appropriations. Prior to her election to Congress, Katherine served as a state representative, state senator, as general counsel for the Massachusetts Office of Child Care Services, and as policy chief in the Attorney General's office. Katherine lives with her husband, Rodney, and their 3 sons in Melrose. Congresswoman Clark, it is so great and so timely to have you with us for this community conversation. In large part, thanks to your and Senator Warren's leadership, President Biden is proposing a major new investment in early education and childcare as part of his American Families Plan. So to get us underway, perhaps you could tell us why you are so passionate about this issue and the work that you're doing in Congress together with the Biden administration to help us achieve the vision of universal access to high quality, affordable care.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason. It is so good to be with you, and I am so pleased to join you today to talk about childcare. And to our other panelists as well, I'm so grateful to all of your work. And we know this is a critical and exciting moment for early education in our country and in the Commonwealth. And I'm so grateful for your leadership, your advocacy, and partnership as we work together to rebuild a system that finally helps every family and worker succeed. As many in the 5th District already know, early education is what brought me into politics in the first place. I ran for the school committee in Melrose because I wanted to secure full-day kindergarten for all families. Working full-time with 3 kids of my own, I knew very well, like too many parents, the importance of early education for kids and parents and how hard sometimes it can be to access. The campaign itself wasn't my most daring. There were 8 candidates for 9 open seats. But to this day, it's one of the hardest jobs I've ever had and one of the most rewarding because it's centered on how we build the future through education for our children. And universal early ed remains my goal to this day. And the reason we're here today is because we all know that in order to build a stronger, healthier, and more equitable country and state, we need access to high quality early childhood education. And throughout this pandemic, childcare and early education have reached a breaking point. The pandemic shook an already fragile system and brought the care economy to its knees. And for too long, this country has failed to recognize childcare for what it is, an essential piece of our economic infrastructure. But this spotlight on this issue has created a window of opportunity to fundamentally change the way we view and fund early education and the care sector. We have woken up to the reality that just like our roads and bridges, childcare fuels our economy and allows parents, businesses, and kids to thrive. And we have a great partner in the White House. President Biden's American Jobs Plan finally honors care workers and strengthens the care economy by calling for upgrades to childcare facilities, providing $25 billion to help upgrade our facilities and increase the supply of infant and toddler care in high-need areas. It expands the tax credit to encourage businesses to build childcare facilities. Employers will receive 50% of the first $1 million of construction costs per facility. And the American Families Plan goes even further for young students and their families. Universal preschool for all 3 and 4-year-olds. $225 billion to help boost the wages for childcare, including a $15 minimum wage for early educators. And if an early educator has the same qualifications as an elementary school teacher, there will be a guarantee of the same salary. There'll also be an extension of key tax cuts to benefit lower and middle income workers and families, including the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, and the child independent care tax credit. Like the American Rescue Plan, these policies are going to directly help parents, educators, and caregivers. Child care providers like Jessica, who was my guest to the joint address last week. She is the owner of a child care business called Little Stars of Ours in Cambridge. And during the pandemic, her business was forced to close March through September. Because of the loss of revenue, Jessica struggled, but was able to reopen with federal assistance, including the Paycheck Protection Program. And now she is looking to expand under the American Rescue Plan. These proposals are now in Congress's hands. And as we are working to pass this into law as quickly as possible, to bring relief, support, and stability to American families. And with the appropriation season in full swing, I am pushing for funding increases to early education programs that could total $25 billion to open up more classroom seats and to financially support childcare providers. These are some of the long-term solutions we need, not to just rebuild from this pandemic, but to create a more equitable, just society and prevent another crisis in childcare of this scope. We can't return to the status quo. This is our moment to rebuild a better, brighter future for all of our children. So again, all of this work being able to do in partnership with you, working with the state, with your legislative ideas and your emphasis is truly a joy. And this is the moment for bold action. Thank you for being such a wonderful partner, Jason, and I'd be happy to answer a few questions.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Clark. It is so exciting to hear you talking about what is happening in Congress and just the possibilities that that this gives us, certainly at the state level and really across our nation, to take a transformative approach to early education and childcare. So I know you have just a couple more minutes, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom to see if we do have any questions coming in from our audience. It looks like we do from Rosalind. Thank you. Let's see, will the legislation, oh, all right. So it looks like Rosalind's sort of thinking about the timing of this. And, obviously, it's been proposed by the president and of course you have been proposing legislation for some time, but maybe you could share with us your thoughts around what the time frame looks like and how we make sure we do keep programs, open and operating.
Yeah, thank you, Rosalind, for this question. And, I think the good news is that the stabilization funding that we were able to secure in the American Rescue Plan, between the funding that we passed at the end of December and what we just passed at the end of March of 21 totals $50 billion. And that's exactly what it's meant to do, to keep the doors open, to allow our childcare programs to reopen and rebuild. So we are confident that that funding, as it gets moved to the state and to our local communities, is going to enable providers to make it through this pandemic and reopen. But the investments that we are going to be talking about over the next few months in Congress are really transformative for the future. It is a way to make it clear that our priority is universal pre-K, and that we understand that we have to make even further investments so childcare is accessible everywhere. I was sort of surprised to learn how many childcare deserts we have just within my congressional district, where I think of us as having pretty decent access, even though it is out of reach from an affordability standpoint for too many families. But even here, we have areas where there just isn't enough childcare, and we need to make sure that families can afford it, that it is accessible and high quality. And I think that universal pre-K is a long overdue recognition that this is really an extension of our elementary education, our K through 12 education, and that we have to make investments as such. So this is the moment, coming out of this particular pandemic, where so many of the inequities that we have seen, that we knew were there, but have really been brought into stark relief in this time. It's our time to make these investments and to make sure that we are using this time to change that paradigm, that childcare is just a private decision between parents and providers, and change it to the recognition that it really is a public good and part of our public education system. So I am hoping that funding will be the stabilization that we need, and this will be the funding to finally create a childcare system that works for everybody.
And just so folks know that amount of funding, which is really unprecedented, that Congresswoman Clark and Democrats in Congress secured for us. For Massachusetts, the bill that passed Congress in December last year is approximately $130 million for our early education providers, and in the American Rescue Plan is over $500 million. And we are working to get that out to our early education sector as soon as possible. So that is critical stabilization funding. So unfortunately, Congresswoman Clark has another engagement, so we're going to have to let her go. But thank you so much for your time with us tonight, and we are so grateful that you are fighting this fight on our behalf in Congress, and we can't wait to see this legislation get signed into law.
Well, as you know, Jason, everything around this issue is based on communities and supporting families. And we are so grateful for your work on this issue, your work on paid leave, all these pieces that come together. And, as the president said, really reward work and not wealth, and really can change the way that we can create an economy that is inclusive of everyone. And so thank you for your amazing work, for inviting me here tonight. And to Lauren and Hilda, thank you as well. It takes true communities coming together to support our children and build a future that's worthy of them. And we really appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take good care.
Good night. All right. So that was a wonderful way to start the conversation, because again, really, when you're talking about tackling the idea, the vision of universal access to affordable, high quality early education and care, it really does take a partnership between the federal government with the resources that they can bring to bear, state government, and obviously at the community level as well. So our next panelist is Lauren Birchfield Kennedy. Lauren is the co-president and chief strategy officer at Neighborhood Villages, which is a Boston-based nonprofit that advocates for early education and childcare policy reforms, and also implements innovative solutions that address the biggest challenges facing early ed providers and families. Prior to co-founding Neighborhood Villages, Lauren served as the Director of Health Policy at the National Partnership for Women and Families in Washington, D.C. She's recognized as a leading voice in the call for comprehensive reform of the early education and care delivery system, both here in Massachusetts and nationally. She has published numerous academic articles and op-eds on this topic, including in the New York Times, and she's the perfect person to now give us a state-level view of what we need to do in this space. So, Lauren, thank you so much for making time for us. Could you please speak about the state of early education and childcare here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and what policy actions you think are needed, both obviously from Congress, we heard from Congresswoman Clark, and also from our state legislature?
Well, Senator, thank you so much for having me as part of this conversation. I am so excited always to talk about the state of early education and care and the opportunities before us to really make a much needed investment in reimagining and recreating our early education and care system so that we build something that works for families, for providers, for educators, and most importantly, for our children. And before I start, I really want to thank you for your leadership. You have always been out in front on this issue, even before it sort of became headline news during the pandemic. So we thank you for all that you have done to really set us up for this conversation now. We wish it didn't take a pandemic to put all eyes on early education and care, but at least it has presented us with an opportunity to really re-examine what's been wrong with our childcare system for so long, and to see where the investments can be made to build something better going forward. So what is the state of the state in Massachusetts right now? I'll say we have a long way to go. As you mentioned, Senator, care here is far too expensive. It financially locks out too many families at an average of $20,000 a year for an infant. That is incredibly expensive. Many of us, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, so if you have one child in care, you very well may likely have another, which can really bring up the average childcare cost in Massachusetts to closer to $30,000 or $35,000. It's a huge amount of money going out the door for really what should be a public good. Part of what our society provides to all families, both so families have the care solutions they need to go to work, but so also that children, every child, has access to early education and care, the same strong start in life. Because as you mentioned, we know that this investment in children at these earliest years is the very best investment that we can make in their education success, in their employment opportunity, and the great things that they go on to do in this world and in service of our country. Here in Massachusetts, we stand at an incredibly exciting opportunity to make early education and care affordable, accessible, universal for all families in the Commonwealth. I'll start by talking about the Common Start bill, which we are so, again, fortunate and thankful that you have brought before the State House this session. And what this bill would do is make early education and care affordable for all families. And it would also ensure that our providers are given the financial and infrastructure supports that they need in order to be able to offer highest quality programming to the children in the Commonwealth. And, you know, Congresswoman Clark set this up so wonderfully to say, what have we always known but maybe ignored and cannot ignore anymore, is that childcare is infrastructure. Early education and care is infrastructure. It sets up our economy, it sets up parents' financial security, their opportunity to earn more, to participate in the economy, sets our children up, as I mentioned. But childcare in and of itself is also a delivery system. There's internal infrastructure to our early education and care delivery system. And I think that's what's very exciting about the Common Start bill, is it looks at affordability for families, but it also looks at how do we build really strong infrastructure so that our early education and care system delivers equally for everybody, including providers and including for educators. So what would the bill do? The bill would make it very affordable for families. If you were making less than 50% of the state median income, care would be free. And no family above that would pay more than 7% for household income, which is huge, and a much needed investment to ensure that all families have access to this system. It would also provide direct funding to providers, as I mentioned, to really support their capacity, recognize that we need them open, we need them available to enroll our children, and we need to move off of how the sort of business model of childcare operates today, which is it's fully dependent on enrollment. So COVID wreaked so much havoc on our childcare system because when programs had to close during the pandemic, or parents maybe disenrolled their child, so many childcare providers lost their income. So what Common Start would do is recognize that you have fixed operating costs no matter how many children are coming through your door. And to preserve your capacity, we need to recognize that and provide you with the funding that allows you to cover those costs to keep your doors open. And it would also raise the value of the financial assistance that families who are eligible for this financial assistance would bring to the childcare program in which they are enrolling, so that a early education and care provider really would be made whole no matter who came through their door, whether that was a family who was paying full freight for the cost of their child's early education, or if it was a family who was coming on with financial assistance, that provider would be made whole, which is really important because right now, unfortunately, how our financial system operates, it really doesn't come close to the actual cost of delivering care. So it can make it difficult for a provider to reserve as many spots for lower income children that they would like to, because the budget, the math just doesn't work. So the Common Start bill, by providing this direct funding, by raising the amount of financial assistance that families are able to bring to a provider, should really incentivize more providers to come in to the early education and care system to meet the demand. We have wait lists that have way too many families waiting for the care solutions that they need. We need more providers to come into the system. And then lastly, it would also make a much needed investment in our early educators. These are teachers. They are offering really high quality programming that goes into our kids' brains when they're the spongiest, when we can make, our sort of, again, best investments in kindergarten readiness and third grade reading levels and high school graduation. We need to recognize these educators as teachers. And that means raising their wages and investing in their professional developments and signaling that we value them as the teachers that they are. So that is the Common Start legislation. It is one of my favorite things to talk about. So I encourage people to ask questions, because I think we really are, and thank you, thanks to the senator, standing on the edge of incredible opportunity to pass historic legislation in Massachusetts. And we need to get the word out. We need to make sure that families across the Commonwealth know about it, and that also providers know about it and are able to ask questions, so that everybody feels a part of this movement. And, in addition to that, I would just echo and get, sort of thank our federal delegation, the work of Congresswoman Clark, the work of Senator Warren. Just to put it in perspective, when we started this conversation about needing more federal funds for our early education and care system, just so it would survive the pandemic, we started with $3.5 billion. Delta Airlines alone got more bailout funds than our early education and care system did back in the spring of 2020. Now we're talking about $225 billion in President Biden's American Families Plan. That's huge. Again, one wouldn't want a pandemic to be the reason why we are making these overdue investments. But thank you to the leadership in our state houses, the leadership in our federal delegation. We are finally pushing this conversation to where it needs to be. So I look forward to being able to weave these efforts together. The federal funds that are coming down, both for stabilization during this time of uncertainty, but also making long-term investments and weaving it into this opportunity to pass really historic state legislation and make Massachusetts a first in the nation example of what we know is possible, which is creating an early education system that works for families, that works for providers, and that works for educators.
Lauren, thank you so much for your amazing work and advocacy in this field. And just so the audience knows, the legislation that Lauren's referring to, which we they call the Common Start bill, Lauren was one of the key authors of this legislation, and it's really been developed over the last several years. And so a lot of good thinking has gone into the bill, and lots of stakeholders, from across Massachusetts, and even ideas from other places have gone into the drafting. And I'm just so excited to file this legislation, along with Senator Sue Moran in the state Senate, and also along with Representative Ken Gordon and Representative Adrian Madaro in the House of Representatives. So we've got a great team, and we've got a whole coalition. We'll talk more, I'm sure, later in this conversation, that's supporting this legislative effort. And as you'll hear as we go on in the conversation, it's very aligned with and complementary with what Congresswoman Clark, Senator Warren, and President Biden are pursuing on the federal level in terms of these transformative investments in early education and childcare. Great. So we're going to now move to our third and final panelist this evening, and also wanted to make sure you start thinking about questions that you have for Lauren or for our next panelist, who I'll introduce in one moment, or for me, anything related to this topic, start thinking about questions you have or feedback you want to share with us, and just go ahead and type that into the Facebook comments, and then we will get to as many of your questions, as we have time for this evening. All right, so I'm going to go ahead now and welcome our next panelist, who is really what I would call an on-the-ground expert in early education and childcare. Hilda Torres left Mexico in 1992, settling in East Boston with her husband and her, at the time, 2 young children. She was continuing her career as a beautician, but when she had the opportunity to start working at the daycare program that her children attended, she found her true calling. She then took early childhood education classes and earned a degree from Bunker Hill Community College. Then in 2012, Hilda, along with her cousin Gerardo Loza, opened My Little Best Friend's Early Learning Center right in downtown Malden. The center's curriculum accommodates multiple languages, including English, Spanish, Mandarin, and sign language. It truly reflects the diversity and vibrancy of the greater Malden community it serves, and I've had the great pleasure of visiting on several occasions, and it is a memorable experience every time. Hilda and Gerardo were recognized as Immigrant Entrepreneurs of the Year by the Immigrant Learning Center recently. Hilda, it is wonderful to have you with us for this conversation tonight. Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about My Little Best Friends and the challenges that you face as an early education provider, which we know was challenging even before the pandemic, and what kinds of help and assistance would you like to see from our state and our federal governments?
Good evening. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a truly honor to be here, learning from you, Lauren, and from Senate Congresswoman Clark. Is honestly like finally a dream come true. It's sad that we have to wait for the pandemic to be able to get recognized. The work that we are doing. I've been in education and early education for more than 20 years. And as you mentioned, Lauren, this has been struggling all the way, But now after COVID, it's been a little bit more difficult. Not only for us to be able to get the supplies that we need to be able to keep our families safe, but also to be able to retain our employees. It's been really difficult to be able to hire teachers, to be able to have more staff, to be able to provide the services to the family. As you mentioned, Senator Jason, we struggled when we closed for the pandemic, and then we opened back in June, and our capacity was really, really small. We only have like around 17, 20 students. We have a handful of teachers, and it was just really difficult. We have a lot of families that they needed our services, but we were not able to provide it at the time because we didn't have the staff that we need, and the requirement needed for us to have a little bit more space between the kids. Now, thank God we are doing much better, but not only my center, other centers, they are suffering with the same issues. We need more teachers. We need to be able to pay these teachers a little bit more money so that way they can stay with us longer. We need to be able to provide better benefits to them. So what you guys are mentioning, it's just great to hear that finally we're going to be able to offer good benefits for our staff so that way they can stay longer with us. Before the pandemic, we used to have 117 students. Right now, we have close to 70. It's really difficult for us to continue afloat in our center. And from I heard from other directors, they are going through the same issues. We get the government funds. We were able to apply for the first PP loan, for the second PP loan, but still, it's a daily struggle. And it's really nice to see that finally we are being recognized. And it's great to know that is a light at the end of the tunnel. And now we're going to be able to get this money to be able to offer better equipment, and to be able to teach our teachers and to educate them a little bit more about how to keep our families safe.
Thank you so much, Hilda. Thank you for everything you've been doing throughout the pandemic. Providers like yourselves, you closed for a short period. I mean, you were required to last spring, and then you already were opening up again, by June. There was, obviously, as everyone can remember, we had a lot of concern and fear about the coronavirus and didn't really fully understand all the risks at that time. And, Hilda's staff and others like her around the state were, we're opening, welcoming children back and, doing this hard work throughout the pandemic. And like you said, you've had, your enrollment's been way down, and your funding is, as Lauren talked about, largely tied to enrollment. So, imagine if we tried to fund the MBTA just on fare revenue that people paid. It's bad enough the problems we have with the MBTA, but imagine if that's their only funding stream was, fare revenue. It would never work. You can't provide a critical service funding it that way. Mm-hmm. So that's a great segue into our discussion, and I know we've got some questions coming in from our audience. So Tom, maybe you can put up the first question for us. All right. So let's see. Thanks, Jennifer, for this question. Funding streams. Yes. So this is one of the challenges in early education as compared to, let's say, K through 12. Our K through 12 system is a completely public system. Obviously, we do have private schools too, but we have a fully funded public system that provides education to all children. But in early education, we have a mixed delivery system, right? So we have some schools that provide preschool, public schools that do that. We have a range of different community providers, some nonprofit, some for-profit, some very small, some very large. So to the question that we just got about providers that are all private pay, in other words, parents are paying the tuition, they don't get state subsidies. That's true. They did not get any relief from the CARES Act. But maybe, Lauren, I'll let you start off. Maybe this one I can add to it as well. But, thoughts around the federal money that we received in December, which is about $130 million for Massachusetts, and also in the President Biden's American Rescue Plan, which is about $500 million. What your expectations are for how that's going to be dispersed to all different providers across the Commonwealth.
Thank you for raising that. Yes, it is so important that all programs across the Commonwealth are able to access these federal funds. And in good news, these more recent stimulus packages have created more flexibility. So programs that take mainly or purely families who are paying the full freight of their children's tuition will be able to access these funds. I believe the Department of Early Education and Care is starting to put out more information on exactly how this will operate. But I can say with confidence that all center-based programs, all family child care programs will be eligible to receive these federal stimulus funds, which I agree is so important.
And I would just echo that as well. In conversations that I've had with the commissioner, as we like to call her, Commissioner Sam, for the Department of Early Education and Care, they have been hard at work on essentially a formula or a methodology to be able to distribute first the $130 million, which was from the December stimulus bill, and then the money from the American Rescue Plan to all providers. So we do expect we'll see those details very, very soon. We know it's urgently needed. And the state legislature is just waiting on a supplemental budget from Governor Baker, which would also authorize that spending to go forward. So in fact, I just asked Secretary of Education, Secretary Pizer, in a meeting earlier today what the status of that is. But we do expect that hopefully we will take that legislation up, and then those funds, will become available. And again, as Lauren said, would be available to all different types of providers, both those that have children who receive subsidies from the state, as well as those where the tuition is fully paid for by parents. All right, let's go to our next question. Okay, after school programming and care, great. Another really important part of this conversation, because most people, I think, when they hear early education and care, think about infants to preschool, right? Sort of birth to age 5. But what we're really talking about here also includes out of school time care for typically elementary school children, before school, after school, summer vacations, and so on. So Hilda or Lauren, do you want to talk a little bit about what's happening in this space? Hilda, I think you only care for very young children. I think your program doesn't include out of school time.
That's right. That's right. We only do infants through 2 months to 5 years old, infants through preschool.
To preschool, right. Mm-hmm. Although, as of course, we have other providers, folks like our YMCAs and our Boys and Girls Clubs, and obviously other community organizations that do provide that out of school time care. So, Lauren, do you want to speak about that part of this sector as well, and see if we can provide?
Yeah, and I'll start by just reiterating the importance of our out of school time programs from a parent's perspective. Your child is learning all day long, and for many to most, the workday doesn't end when the school day ends, and so it provides a really critical care solution for families so that they know their child is safe and learning during the hours that they are at work. And I say that as just to reiterate the important part of this fabric of the early education and care system. So my understanding is that all licensed programs under early education and care, which includes our out of school time and after school care programs, are able to access these funds. And I will also say that the Common Start legislation includes after school programming for school age kids as part of its vision for a transformed early education and care system. So Common Start doesn't just speak to birth to 5, it also includes school aged and after school programs in recognition that it is a huge part of our delivery system.
Great. All right. Let's go to our next question. Staff recruiting and retention. Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You want to take this one?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just touch on really quickly, the federal plan laid out by President Biden does touch on how do we increase educator pay, how do we invest in their professional development. Here in Massachusetts, the Common Start legislation also takes a really close look at that. We need to raise wages, but as the comment or question mentioned, we also need to invest in professional development. We need to make teachers feel valued. Even when we do increase wages, I don't know too many people who are going into early education and care for the money. They're going into it because they love working with and educating children. And so it's a whole package of how we ensure that our early educators feel valued. And I'll just maybe mention a couple of things happening in the state right now, in case it's of interest to you, to your programs, to folks in your network. But the state for a few years now has made a really important investment in trying to make it more accessible for early educators to get their license and to get their CDA credential. Through the career pathways for early educators, the state has been investing in community colleges and their ability to offer the coursework you need to be licensed, to get your CDA for free, so that we remove the financial barrier. I also encourage people to get in touch with neighborhood villages. We're www.neighborhoodvillages.org, because we partner with a lot of these community colleges to really try to wrap around our early educators and say, how can we help make sure that you're most successful as you pursue ongoing professional development? How do we bring the classroom to the community so we reduce transportation barriers? How do we make sure that we're offering classes in other languages? We are, in partnership with Urban College, able to offer classes in Spanish, in Haitian Creole. Soon we'll be doing Portuguese. So I think there are a lot of opportunities happening right now that I encourage anybody interested to get in touch, because I agree, pay is huge, but we also need to be looking at professional development, ongoing instructional coaching, everything that we put into K-12 to ensure high quality programming. We need to be investing in birth to 5 as well.
So well said. For too long, we've just undervalued and underappreciated our early educators and staff, and they do such critical work caring for our children and teaching them. Hilda, maybe if you want to add, I know it's a major struggle for you to recruit and retain, the staff that you need to care for your children. Maybe what some thoughts are that you have around, what kind of help you need in this area.
I think what Lauren is saying is just great to be able to offer other people that they wanted to work in early education the opportunity to go to school and to get educated. A lot of people is not really very good informed about the steps that they need to be able to join these kind of the facilities, childcare and everything. And people are just afraid. They're just afraid because they don't have the money to afford for their education. I think by these women that they are looking for job and to know that they're gonna be able to go to school for free, I think that's a very great incentive that we can have as administrator to be able to call people to come to work for us.
Well said. And, we should point out this is really a social justice and a racial justice issue, because the vast majority of people who do work and provide care to our children, both young children and out of school time, are women, and a disproportionate number are women of color. So that is another very important aspect to what we need to do here to lift them up. All right. Do we have another question, Tom? All right. From Beth Seidel. You're looking at a mixed delivery system for universal model. I'm concerned as a private preschool who takes 3 to 5. Great question. So Lauren will probably want to weigh in on this too, but I can assure you that we are absolutely looking at a mixed delivery system. The whole idea of the Common Start legislation is not to try to start from scratch or rebuild, a system. And we're not trying to, mimic our K through 12 system, which is all public. We're looking to build on and support the existing mixed delivery system that we already have. So, we know that we have lots of different kinds of providers, and families, like having different options and different choices. And the key, we think, with this legislation is to make sure that, we strengthen all providers and we strengthen the workforce, what we've just been talking about. And of course, we make it affordable for not just low income, but also middle income families as well, who are really struggling today. Lauren, do you want to add anything to that in terms of the sort of delivery system?
No, I would just reiterate that all of the conversations within the state very much are looking to preserve the mixed delivery system. And then I think, an action item for the federal conversation is to really push on the Biden administration, and it's sort of like, how am I going to get to the president? But you have Congresswoman Clark, you have Senator Warren, who always say, work for you, call them up and tell them that you need them to push on the administration to drive home that when we talk about universal preschool, universal pre-K, it's not limited to just state-funded programs that are an extension of our public school system. But we also need to look to where a lot of families get their preschool programming, which is in our private programs. And how do we build up resiliency in those programs at the same time that we're looking to increase access to preschool and pre-K in other settings as well.
And I would just add, we definitely understand, just the financial equation for early ed providers, is so precarious, as it is. And we understand that if you were to take 3 and 4-year-olds and sort of peel them off and have them basically be receiving their education in our public schools, then the financial model would really not work for many community providers. So we know it's tricky and it's complicated, and that's why we really do have to support a mixed delivery system so that all providers can thrive and families have a range of choices that kind of best meets their need in their community, in their neighborhood.
I think it's just really important that if we provide high quality of education to our teachers they're going to be able to provide high quality of education to the kids. And it's just a circle. The parents, they're going to be able to bring the kids to center like us, to be able to bring their kids to get the education that they need. They're going to be able to go to work in peace. They're going to be able to be more proactive and productive at work because the kids, they are getting educated and they are being taken care of. So it's just think as a whole circle, if we all work together to be able to offer better services to their families and to be able to offer a high quality of the education care for all families, it's just going to be working for everybody,
Absolutely. This is a win-win-win-win, right?
That's right.
Children, for families, for providers. All right. Let's see. Rosalind has another question for us. People are using both childcare and universal pre-K. Okay, so kind of what do we mean by these different terms? Good question. We do throw around childcare, early ed, universal pre-K, out of school time. So maybe who wants to take this one? Lauren, this is probably up your alley.
Yeah, I don't know that I'll be able to shed, too much light because, ultimately, at least when I use the word universal means that all families are able to access birth to 5 and also after school programming. So the question really is, all right, well then where are they going? And what we were just discussing is, well, when we look at birth to 5, it's a mixed delivery system. Your choices can be, private center-based programs, private family childcare programs, or, maybe your school district offers pre-K or preschool as part of what you're able to elect into. Now, I think, right, this is going back to some of President Biden's language that's a bit confusing because my understanding is he really means a pre-K to preschool that builds down from public school. And so, yes, we do need to really push on and be careful and intentional about our language to ensure that we don't let anybody off the hook in assuming that that's the solution, because we really need to look from birth all the way up and see all of the different ways by which we are delivering programs for really young children. So, and there was some, sort of funny dialogue happening after the president's speech on Wednesday, which is call it what you want to call it. Birth to 5 is early education and care. We need to recognize that it's delivered in a number of different ways. And so when we do really intentional, transformative policy, like the Common Start legislation, we need to make sure that we're lifting up center-based programs, that we're lifting up family childcare, while also making sure that we're doing complementary efforts with districts or other advocates who may be more focused on pre-K and preschool, specifically as they are related to our public education system.
Great. And one thing I'm also I try to be very careful in my language is not to just call this childcare, because this really is about education. I mean, maybe less so with infants in the first few months of their life, but certainly once you're getting into toddlers, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and then obviously children when they're in elementary school, this is a critical part of their cognitive development and their education. And we have, tremendous years worth of research now that shows that high quality early education, has an enormous impact on children's academic, social, emotional performance and development, in school and on into, even into their adult years. So hopefully that helps. I know it can get a little confusing with some of the terminology here. And frankly, that's been one of the reasons why it has been challenging to achieve major reforms in this space. I mean, part of it is funding. Of course, that's always a challenge, but part of it also is it's a lot more complicated than let's say our K through 12 system is, and obviously that has its own unique challenges. Do we have another question, Tom? All right, from Donna. Would funding be available for potentially new centers to open? Okay, that's a great one. The answer is absolutely yes. That under the Common Start legislation, we believe if we could equitably and adequately fund early education and care, that we would definitely increase demand among families. And right now, if you look at the number of young children who are, would be eligible for care in Massachusetts, and you look at the number of actual available spots, there's a huge mismatch, a huge gap, because we know so many families, just can't access it either because of it's unaffordable for them, or what they're looking for is just not accessible right in their own community. So definitely, the expectation here is not just that existing providers would be able to survive, and hopefully not just survive, but thrive and expand in some cases if they want to, but also to open up opportunities for new providers as well. Anyone want to add to that, Hilda or Lauren?
No, I think it's great that other people, they wanted to open more facilities. I think we want to need more help. I think we want to need all those people that they closed during pandemic to be able to reopen their doors. When we were seeing other centers close, and every time I kept thinking to myself, and I'm going to be next. People that we've been in education for many, many years, this is our life. This is the only thing that we know to do, and to see centers closing, it was just really a heartbreaking. So knowing that now the government is going to be able to help these centers to reopen and to new centers to open the doors as well, I think that's excellent for our families. Our families, they need to go back to work. They need to go back to work, and we need to be able to provide the care that they need.
And I would just add, most definitely, I'd say it's a really important part of the Common Start legislation is bringing new people into the field, new businesses into the field. The Congresswoman mentioned childcare deserts. 50% of Massachusetts is a childcare desert, which means there aren't enough licensed spots to go around. We need to bring, I think we lost almost 20% of our early education and care capacity during the pandemic. We've got to bring those folks back online, and we have to make, and I think this is really important, right? Creating an early education and care system that works means it has to work for providers, that you want to come in, you want to open a program because you get to do what you love to do, but you also know that you're on good, solid, financial footing, and that you're not just, 1 month away from having to close your doors. Or if you have fluctuation in enrollment, it's not going to mean that you have to close your program or close a classroom, because we're supporting your business the same way that we support businesses in other core infrastructure pieces of the Commonwealth, of the country. That's the investment that Common Start is looking to make in the providers who prop up our delivery system.
And of course, as part of that we are appropriately investing and supporting in our workforce, in our early educators that are obviously critical to the staffing of whether it's centers or family-based providers. All right. Do we have another question, Tom? All right. We get some. Okay, so I take it from Jennifer's question. Obviously, there's a lot here. She's a private pay provider and is asking all the right questions around, if they're going to be public dollars that are provided, what does that mean in terms of some of the flexibility and the policies that she can set, for her center. So, Lauren, I think I'm going to hand that one to you to sort of. I know there's been a lot of thinking that has gone into this aspect of the bill. Maybe you want to share some thoughts here.
Sure. So I'll start by saying the filing of the legislation and the sort of stage that it's in right now is still early days. A lot of these details are in conversation, they're being ironed out, and I'll be just transparent and saying, once it passes in the State House, a lot more sort of these details that you're asking about will in fact happen post passage in the State House. They'll be under this discretion of the administration. They'll be under the discretion of the Department of Early Education and Care. So we may not be able to answer some of these very detailed questions about, will the rate be this much or will it be that much? But what we are able to say is what the bill does and what it doesn't do. So the bill doesn't cap rates. It doesn't say anything about that. The bill, as it is right now, doesn't assign a certain amount of funding to financial assistance through vouchers. It doesn't assign a certain amount of funding to the operational grants that the Common Start legislation contemplates. What it does is provide a directive to the Department of Early Education and Care to say, here are all the factors that must go in to how you calculate whether it's the value of the voucher subsidy or the value of the operational grant. It has to take into consideration the true cost of operating a really high quality program. It has to take into consideration educator wages, professional development, facilities, the operations staff that it requires to run a program. So while we perhaps can't answer these questions at a highly detailed level, what we can do is definitely stay in conversation as some of these kind of more detailed questions get worked out as the bill goes through the legislative process. And then certainly, again, once it's passed, begins a really important time of engagement so that we are ensuring that the Department of Early Education and Care abides by the spirit of the law and really does ensure that all of these core elements of running a program are baked into the funding levels that it will provide to early education and care providers.
And just to add to that, I would certainly acknowledge that, as a legislator and in my role as the Senate Chair of the Education Committee, we definitely focus more and think more about providers who do who do have children that receive state subsidies, because that's obviously where state and federal dollars are going today. And a critical part of moving to this vision of a universal system is, again, bringing all, providers, into this equation. So hearing more input from providers, like I think our questioner, who today, are surviving on private pay, parent tuitions and fees, and what this would mean for you, what would work for you and what would not work for you, would be very valuable. So I do want to encourage folks to reach out to certainly my office and to also leaders in the Common Start Coalition, like Lauren, like Amy O'Leary, like Deb Festino and others who are leaders in the space, and absolutely share your feedback. Looks like Lauren's had one of her children joining, which may mean we're getting to time to.
All right, we're living the pitch here. One thing I did want to add, though, Senator, to your mention of Common Start, is we would really encourage providers to get involved with the coalition. There's no commitment that you have to support the bill. These are just conversations to make sure that as the bill is, excuse me, I'm sorry, that as the bill is coming together, as this conversation continues, we have your voice driving it. So Common Start, if you go to its website, it's commonstartma.org. You can find chapters to connect with. These are regional chapters. They're nearby where you live, where your place of business is. And that's a really great place to get connected and bring exactly these questions.
All right. So perhaps we are going to have to wrap up soon, but Tom, maybe we have time for one more question. Okay, from Jane, will funding under Common Start ensure a maximum percentage of, and yes, the proposal is up to, if a family is up to half of the state's median household income, they would not have to pay for the care of their children. And then once you're above half of the state's median income, it would be a sliding scale with a maximum of 7% of household income. And that's consistent with what President Biden is proposing. It's also consistent with Senator Warren's national universal legislation. That's pretty, that's based upon kind of best practices. So hopefully that answers that question. All right, I think we are going to have to wrap up. I apologize if there are other questions. I know this is such a exciting topic and just so timely for everything that's happening. But we definitely will continue this conversation. I'm extremely grateful to Congresswoman Katherine Clark, to Lauren Kennedy, and to Hilda Torres for joining us tonight and for the work that you're doing every day in this space. Please don't hesitate to, again, contact my office if you do have further questions or if you have further feedback you'd like to share with us. We definitely welcome hearing from you. Again, we are still in the early stages of the legislative session and working on the Common Start bill. So there's plenty of opportunity to continue to shape it and strengthen it as we go forward. And of course, we also are watching very closely to see what happens next with President Biden's proposals at the national level. So thanks again. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Hilda.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.